Lannister. Chapter 91. Bad news at Reddinghall. Qyburn Pav. Qyburn walked through the cold, candlelit hallway, steam rising from the bowl of stew in his hands. This was, in fact, not the sort of career he had imagined making for himself in the Westerlands. It was one thing to be requested as a personal healer by a Lannister lordling. That sounded glamorous, offered him political protection from his numerous foes, and saw him tangentially involved in some of the greatest feats of genius that Westeros had seen in centuries. It was another thing to play personal tender to a sick, if clever, child with a sharp temper while staying in a frigid, tiny castle on the barren coasts of the Westerlands. Still, Qyburn supposed, he wouldn't have one without the other. So no matter if his considerable talents were being squandered on something trivial, it was still better to be working for someone who appreciated those talents than not. The Black Maester pushed his way into the bedroom with his shoulder. It was Spartan for a noble, doubly so compared to the rooms at Castle Rock. Even Qyburn's room there was fancier. Still, the great fireplace on one side kept it quite a lot warmer than the rest of the castle, and where it lacked in proper tapestries to retain the heat, thick carpets had been hung on the walls. Lord Callum was sitting in a cushioned chair to one side of the room, wrapped in blankets. The lad had a stack of papers in front of him, as was his natural state, and seemed to be sketching something out with a quill pen. You may want to clear your work back, my lord, Qyburn commented dryly, carrying over the stew in his hands. Ah, Qyburn, I didn't notice you come in. Thank you, Callum said, setting his pen down and pushing his papers back. He took the stew cheerfully. It's only my duty, my lord, Qyburn said, though he appreciated the gratitude. How are you feeling? I still have a fever, I can feel it, but I'm getting dreadfully bored, Callum grumbled, before shoveling down a few spoonfuls of the thick beef and carrot stew. My head has been clearer at least. I've gotten a bit of work done. Qyburn glanced over at the papers in question. It looked like one of the young lord's electrical sketches, given the number of wires involved, but Qyburn was hardly the expert on those. Still, he was bored himself, so he took the seat across from the boy and started to look through the papers. What are you working on? He asked, glancing through the materials. Well, I've got an idea for a form of electrical communications, Callum explained in between continuing to eat his soup. The basic principle is that you can reconnect and disconnect an electrical circuit using a switch or lever. If you have a noisemaker, something I've already worked out about a year ago, then it will buzz whenever the circuit is connected, and be silent when it is not. So it could be an alarm bell of sorts. Qyburn asked, but Callum shook his head. Not quite. It's more of a replacement for ravens. He said quietly. If you could run a copper or more likely an iron wire between, say, here and Castle Rock, then you could send messages back and forth essentially instantaneously. The means for doing so would be a switch that could be pressed down for different amounts of time to signal different letters. For example, the boy made a buzz with his lips. A long buzz or a short buzz could be differentiated from the noisemaker and used to decode messages. It would be many times faster and more reliable than ravens. I cannot imagine that would be inexpensive, Qyburn commented. Even with the cost of your mother's statue in comparison. It most certainly would not be inexpensive. Callum agreed. But it would be worthwhile. It would enormously increase the speed of our communications, and thus the speed of everything else we do. The boy scratched his chin. I wish I could do the same for transportation, but the solution to that problem eludes me. Our metalworking isn't good enough for the mechanical solutions I've devised. Qyburn snorted, amused at the boy's arrogance, though still impressed by his ingenuity. The Lannisters truly had no concept of the wealth that they wielded. Or at least Callum didn't. The sheer insanity of scale with what he proposed. Castle Rock was over 200 miles and 3 mountain ranges away, but he was more concerned about blacksmithing than the costs involved. Qyburn couldn't have asked for a wealthier patron. Not without going to either the boy's father or the Iron Bank of Bravos. At any rate, the actual plan for the system is already sound. The difficulty is that as electricity passes through a wire it loses energy, which means that on such a long wire, it will likely not carry enough charge to reach the buzzer on the other end. Callum paused for a moment, downing the rest of his soup straight from the edge of the bowl. And for that, I need to make an entirely new system. That's what's making it hard. He grinned cheerfully. I need something that will take the weaker charge it receives on one end, and then send it down the next section of wire stronger, maintaining the strength regardless of the distances involved. That's what I'm working on now. Qyburn smiled, glancing down at the papers again, to see if he could make anything of the child's wild designs, but he was interrupted by a knocking at the door. Come in, Callum said quickly, looking up from the chair. Message for you, Millard. One of Lord Tygett's cavalrymen said. Just came by courier from your uncle. Callum looked up, blinking, and shuffled over to take the letter, leaving his blankets behind him on the chair. Thank you. Of course, my lord. The man looked like he wanted to be dismissed, but Callum did no such thing, tearing open the seal and reading the letter quickly. Qyburn watched as his master and presently charge grew more alarmed with each passing moment. Damn it, he muttered, frowning. Damn it. You Philip, yes. Get 3 healthy men on their horses as fast as you can. The courier wasn't a knight, was he? No, my lord. It was Jason. Philip nodded. And my lord, your uncle took all the horses from the stables when he went east. We've only the one Jason arrived on, and it's bone tired. Then I'm of the highest rank in Readinghall. Callum wiped his mouth, and Qyburn frowned as the boy clearly tried to drop his voice, but had little luck, sounding more nasal than commanding. Tell the men to get cart horses, anything they can find from nearby farms. My uncle says the main fleet of the Ironborn is coming this way. I need scouts. Yes, my lord. Philip nodded, and even Qyburn felt panic shoot up his spine. The Ironborn could already be in the region, given the time it took for a courier to ride from the running country. As the man left, Callum sighed, sitting down on his bed as the energy seems to flow out of him. Redport is not 10 miles from here, and the beaches of the Hullock too. We could already have an Ironborn host descending on us as we speak. Callum coughed into his hand as he finished speaking. Qyburn winced. That stress wasn't good for his health. You're in no condition to command the castle, my lord, Qyburn said slowly. It's be best if what I hand it to some bumpkin who doesn't know how to read a map, much less plan for a siege. I may not have experience, but I at least have theory. My uncle's men don't even have that. Callum snapped. Half of them are sicker than I am. That wasn't quite accurate in Qyburn's opinion. While several men had gotten sick from the wet and cold, a man's body could better handle disease than a boy's. Most were in better condition than Callum at least. Still, Qyburn deferred. In his experience, it was best to defer to the lords when it came to war. And not to mention Redport. If the Ironborn aren't there already, I'll need to protect them. Callum held his hand to his forehead. This is cursed timing, but we must do our duty as the times require. That is the prevailing wisdom, yes, Qyburn grumbled, following behind as Callum made his way out of the room, shuffling out to the courtyard, where men hadn't yet started to drift back in with horses. Callum raised his voice, straining as he tried to catch the attention of the men on watch. I have good news and bad news, all of you. Callum walked towards the raised platform in the square, shivering slightly as a cold wind passed through the holdfast. The good news, my uncle Tygett cut off a third of the enemy fleet on the running river. Callum's voice grew pinched, and he coughed several times into his hand. Still, there were cheers from the men who were slowly starting to gather. The bad news is that the rest of the Ironborn fleet is coming our way. They've already burned Trout Point, and Redport is no doubt next in their sights. We could be besieged here, though my uncle is no more than a week away and riding to our aid. There was tension as he began to speak, but the news that Lord Tygett would be coming swiftly lifted the spirits of the men. Men besieged in such conditions would be hopeless, but not with a large group of cavalry mere days away. That said, I've called men already to get horses, to scout our situation and find out where the Ironborn are. Callum continued. In my father and uncle's stead, it is our duty to protect the people of the Westerlands, namely Redport and the farms and villages on the Hullock. The men nodded in agreement. Though they were taking orders from a child half their age, they could accept it if he appealed to the authority of Lord Tywin and Lord Tygett. Though Qyburn suspected that if Callum asked them to do anything they didn't already agree with, he would face more doubt. None of these men would disagree though. They had taken up arms to protect the northern coast of the Westerlands, so why would they argue when asked to do just that? Qyburn, for his part, frowned as Callum continued. While our scouts are doing their work, I will need a few other men to ride with me to Redport. If the Ironborn have not yet sacked it, we will evacuate the village. There is no way we could defend it from the Ironborn until my uncle returns. Callum paused for a moment, catching his breath. We'll bring the fighting men back here and arm them. The elders, women, and children we'll send with their fishing boats upriver, to spread the news at Humbleton, and flee to Geert's Gap. If the Ironborn go that far inland, then we'll have ample time to warn them, and my uncle will trap and slaughter them just as he did in the running country. Qyburn wanted to raise his voice. Callum should not be riding about the countryside sick. He shouldn't even be out here barking orders, but he couldn't do anything more than frown, lest he jeopardize the boy's already fragile authority over the fortress. All right, that all said, who can tell me the state of our storerooms? And what of the battlements? We may be under siege soon. Get crossbows ready. Callum coughed, bending over slightly, then shook his head, yelling with a hoarse voice. What are you doing? Get moving already. Lannister. Chapter 92. Evacuation of Redport I. Septa Yevena Pav. The sept at Redport, while it was the largest for 50 miles, was not a particularly impressive building. An old stone foundation and walls, who knew how many centuries old, held up a wooden upper wall and roof with 7 sides. At its center, there was a fire pit, with benches on all the sides that slowly raised to the edges of the building. Overlooking the benches from alcoves in each wall were wood-carved statues of the 7. They stared down at the platform in the center by the fire pit, which was also where the sept or septon stood during worship. It resembled most other septs on the northern coast of Westerlands in its style, particularly the high steepled roof with 7 sides with a chimney in its center. It was designed to ward off the wind, rain, and occasional snow. The main distinction was its size. Some 1,500 of the faithful could fit onto the benches or stand inside on a worship day and often did so. It was much larger than most of the septs on the north coast by that standard. That was because Redport herself was a more prosperous town than most. A fishing village at the end of the Hullock River, she had ample food through winter by fishing in Ironman's Bay, and, because they regularly traded with the Ironborn, was only occasionally harassed by raiders. She wasn't the largest settlement on the north coast, which was further west, but going east she was the last village that could possibly be called a town until one reached Seaguard, almost 200 miles away and halfway around Ironman's Bay. On the foot of the sept, looking down over the town she'd been born in, Septa Yevena smiled and turned the page, reading her own copy of the 7-pointed star. She was bundled up in her wool cloak to keep out the bitter sea breeze as she read in the afternoon light. The book in her hands still didn't feel real to her, even months after she had received it. Simple and leather-bound, it had thin lines of regimented text, which was thick and blocky. There were barely any illuminations. One in front of Lord Lannister and his blessed son Callum, and then one for each of the 7 books. In many ways, it was an uglier, more boring version of the 7-pointed star than any other she had read. But that didn't matter. It didn't matter one bit, because it was hers. Not the sept's. Before the books had arrived, there were only 3 copies in all of Redport. And Septon Barlow had been halfway through a 4th. Now there were more than 400. It was a miracle given freely to all the Westerlands. A miracle indeed. The Lord Lannister's son was blessed by all the 7. That was what the Septon who had brought the books had told them all, and when she read the book of the maid from her own tome, she felt happy to live in such times. Even the threat of the heathen Ironborn, reaving and raiding on the coast, could not dampen her spirits. An infectious spiritual revival had come to Redport, one that could be felt through the whole of her congregation. And so she smiled, despite the cold, and the bitter wind, and all the other distractions in life, for her soul was free as a bird, reading the exploits of Huger and the great deeds he did in Andalos of old. So focused was she on the words, that she did not notice the clopping of horses' hooves until they were nearly upon her. Blinking, she looked up to see a party of 10 riders. Men on old bedraggled horses, but armed for war. She felt her heart speed for a moment. Could they be Ironborn? But it calmed as she saw that their colors were red and yellow, Lannister colors, and moreover that they seemed to be approaching her without any haste or malice. On a second glance, the rider at the lead of the party was even a child. A boy of 11 or 12, she taught children his age their letters twice a week. He looked a bit exhausted from the ride, but his green eyes fixed her sharply as he approached, too sharply for a child his age. Good afternoon, Septa, he said quickly, before coughing into his shoulder, then turning back to her. I hate to be a bearer of bad news, but have there been any Ironborn sightings recently? Yevena shook her head, tucking her copy of the 7-pointed star into her bag as she approached the men. No, we haven't seen a raider or even a fisherman in months. They're all up in the running country, I'd heard. Not anymore. The boy answered grimly. There's a fleet of 5 raiding ships coming west. They raised Trout Point 4 days ago. Redport is likely their next target. Yevena's spine straightened and her veins ran like ice. What? Here. You're sure? Redport hadn't been truly raided in generations. This would be disastrous. They might go around, but I wouldn't put a half-star on it. It's the same raiders that burned down all the fishing villages in the running country. The boy nodded. Septa, do you think you could help us gather together the people? I'm here to organize an evacuation of the village. She looked up into the boy's stern green eyes and swallowed down her fear. Yes, of course. I will tell the other septons and septas we can raise the alarm. Good. The blond boy glanced back to the men behind him. The rest of you, help her. Let's have all the people gathered in half an hour. Or as many as we can manage. He rode off down the hill on his horse, coughing a bit more as he went, leaving Yevena looking up at 9 young men on horseback, with armor and spears. She was surprised to see that they were looking at her expectantly, not the sort of presence she'd expect from a knight or even a soldier. Still, she was a woman not unused to leading others, albeit normally in more spiritual matters. She cleared her throat, and with all the practice she'd had singing hymns, projected her voice. Right, she said. All of you follow me. The next half hour was pure unadulterated chaos for Yevena. From telling her fellow septons and septas what she'd heard, to figuring out a plan so that everyone would hear. She had sent the young riders off to spread the news of the incoming Ironborn attack down all the main streets, and she went from door to door herself, chasing down every lost child and old woman alone in her home. By the time she was done, a nervous crowd was beginning to form at the center of town near the docks. Yevena saw that the platform there, usually used as a gallows, or for musicians during festivals, had been repurposed into a speaker's stand by the blond boy and the soldiers. She saw him cough again, and clear his throat, and in a hoarse voice, he yelled to be heard in the square. What you have been told is true. The Ironborn are near, and likely to raid Redport, with a force of 5 ships and perhaps 400 warriors. My name is Callum Lannister. I am Lord Tygett's nephew and squire, and I am here to make sure that everyone is. Lord Callum the Blessed. Someone shouted, and suddenly a great mumbling started through the crowd, and Yevena could not hear the boy's voice anymore. Not that she would have anyway, as her thoughts had ground to a halt. Had the boy truly been Callum the Blessed? She blinked, pulling her copy of the 7-pointed star from her bag tenderly as the crowd began to speak more loudly. It is Lord Callum. She's a boy. I thought she was a girl. It says son in the book. The most devout said he was blessed by the 7, Septon Gareth told me. The 7 sent him to save us. Yevena raised the book to her bosom and looked back and forth between the boy on the stage, looking increasingly bewildered, and the crowd that was growing more noisy. It was true. He looked just like the picture. His pretty features were just more subtle with his haircut so short. He was the miracle worker, and he had talked to Yevena personally. He had asked for her help even. Her heart thundered in her chest as the slender boy raised his hand high up above his head, and the crowd slowly began to quiet. A bitter wind ripped through the square and he coughed again. Yevena felt a chill go down her spine despite her warm clothes. Was he sick? The child who was so blessed by the 7. Lannister. Chapter 93. Evacuation of Redport 2. Her heart thundered in her chest as the slender boy raised his hand high up above his head, and the crowd slowly began to quiet. A bitter wind ripped through the square and he coughed again. Yevena felt a chill go down her spine despite her warm clothes. Was he sick? The child who was so blessed by the 7. But the boy shook it off, and to a crowd now practically vibrating with anticipation, he began to speak. I need you all to stay calm for a moment. The town needs to evacuate, all in an orderly fashion. Women, children, and old men should take the fishing boats upriver to Geert's Gap. Take food and valuables with you. Any men strong enough to fight, I'll need you at Reddinghall. We are going to hold off the Ironborn if they come this way, at least until my uncle arrives. We have to leave. But the Ironborn will burn our homes. A voice called from the crowd, but the boy shook his head. My uncle left only 40 men behind, and half are not suited for fighting. He will be here in a week, but your lives cannot wait a week. Gather your things in FL. The boy began to cough again, more harshly this time. One of the soldiers walked towards him to help, but he raised his hand, recovering himself, though he seemed pale. Listen to me. Take your things and escape as I've asked. You will be luckier than the men and women of Trout Point and of the running country. Just please, leave with your lives. A house can be rebuilt in time. Yevena frowned, as she saw that his words caused confusion in the crowd. She supposed it made sense. Few wanted to leave home on such short notice. Even if they knew the threat of the Ironborn, they hadn't truly been raided in generations, and it was winter besides. Traveling would be harsh on them. Still, the blessed child was right. Their lives were more important. Yevena cleared her throat. Listen to him, she shouted over the murmuring crowd, projecting her voice as far as she could. Your lives are more important than your possessions. Can you not hear his words? The seven themselves send the blessed child to save us, and yet you quibble about your old houses. Before the wrath of the Ironborn, you would lose them anyway. Pack your things and go. Yevena hadn't even noticed the eyes starting to turn towards her, the whole of the crowd beginning to change their focus. She suddenly felt very small, but the hoarse voice of the blessed child came just after. Well said, Septa. He shouted, seizing on the momentum she had given him. Everyone gather your things, food most of all, but valuables too. Leave nothing for the Ironborn that you can carry. Those who will escape to Geert's Gap. Follow the Septa. Those who can fight, follow me and my men. We will set out to Reddinghall in 1 hour. Take the children to the boats first. Someone shouted, and soon more voices joined them. My boat has room for several families. Bring your things to the docks, we'll load them down as heavy as they can still take the river. Septa Yevena, what should I do? Yevena blinked as she saw that one of the older women in the crowd, Lena, had approached her. I don't think I can carry much. Guide the children, Yevena said instantly, her mind rolling across the plains like 100 horses. I'll get your things. It was neither the first nor the last question she got that day, as Yevena soon found herself in charge of well over half the town's people, navigating a stream of fishing boats up the Hullock and away from their homes. Gorman Bloodtooth Pav. They knew we were coming, Gorman muttered, leaning on the head of his great axe as his gaze moved across the deserted town. The settlement of Redport, normally a prosperous trading hub, had been stripped before their arrival. The people fled and took most everything valuable with them. It wasn't a terrible loss, but it foreshadowed dark things to come. Aye, came the reply of Longshanks beside him, looking like a petulant child. They'll have fled to the castle at Reddinghall. The traders say that Lord Tygett refurbished it. The Greyjoy heir in his disguise frowned. We should go and lay it flat, while its master is still in the running country. Flat. Gorman chuckled. Have you ever been in a siege before, brat? The lion would be on our hands before we even had a good camp established, and we've scant the provisions for it besides. The old raider tapped his chin. It galled him truly that things had come to this. His heart still burned with vengeance for his son, but old senses long honed told him that the raid had gone sour. It was time to withdraw with the loot he'd already gained. To draw back to the Isles and wait for another chance, with fairer weather and perhaps less impetuous allies. I still want the bastard's eyes, but this is a sign. When the villages start to empty ahead of our coming, it's time to stop raiding. The longer we drag this on, the greater the risk of defeat. The other man turned to Gorman with a sneer. What, have you turned coward? We know where they ran. Even if it's best to leave, surely we can at least have the castle's loot. And how do you suggest we take a castle before the lion and his cavalry return? Gorman asked, shaking his head. I was young like you once, Gr. Longshanks. Raiding in Slaver's Bay around Yunkai. I always thought I was invincible. I'd chase after fish far too big for me to catch, and then be surprised when they bit my hands. No. My revenge won't be best served by taking silly risks. If the Westerlanders have escaped us now, there's nothing to stop us coming back in 3 months, when they're not anticipating the fleet on their doorstep. And how did you win gold and glory except by feats of daring? Longshanks returned his ire. Just because you're old and salty now, doesn't mean you didn't earn your name by doing great deeds. Would you deny me my chance for the same? Gorman frowned. The Greyjoy brat's words were true. Caution might make a man rich, but it wouldn't make him great. Still, what Gorman wanted above all was revenge. That was the fire that burned cold in his heart. Fame was a virtue he already possessed, and glory lacked charm unless it served some greater purpose. Still, Gorman was swayed a bit by the young man's passion. Before he could think of a reply, one of the parties they'd had scouting the countryside returned, and both Ironborn glanced up to see a lanky blonde man being dragged in chains through the town, a gag over his lips. Captain Bloodtooth, Lord Longshanks. Hurrell Fee, the leader of the little band, greeted them. We caught this Greenlander watering his horse. He's wearing Lannister colors. Hurrell Fee kicked the man over on the ground, causing him to let out a groan. Gorman could see that he wore a red and yellow jerkin, along with other riding leathers. He didn't look like a knight exactly, so probably one of those cavalrymen Lord Tygett had riding about with him. Well, what are you waiting for? Get his gag off. Let's see what our friend here has to tell us, Longshanks demanded, and Hurrell Fee dutifully obliged, the blonde staring up balefully at the reavers as they undid the bond around his mouth. You Ironborn bastards, go drown your heads in the sea. The Westerlander shouted almost as soon as the gag was removed. In response, Hurrell Fee, with his heavy steel gauntlet, laid into the man's cheek with a bunch, drawing a bit of blood from the ridges of the metal knuckles. The young man groaned but didn't say anything else, only glaring up at them with his battered face. Longshanks stalked over like a demon, drawing the longsword from his belt. He plunged its tip into the dirt by the man's nose, making the Greenlander flinch away in fear. That's better. You ought to know not to speak that way to your betters, wretch. The Greyjoy heir's voice oozed disdain as he squatted down next to the man. Now listen to me, you're going to tell me everything you know about that castle at Reddinghall, and if you lie I'll cut off your dick and feed it to you. The Westerlander looked back up at Longshanks and, with a quivering lip, spat on his sword. Feck you. Your mother's a whore and your father's a horse. Why you? The Greyjoy raised his blade to stab through the man's face, but Gorman caught his shoulder, pulling Longshanks back. Don't do something stupid, Gorman said plainly. He reached down and grabbed the man by the cheeks, and, in a move that left Gorman's old back aching, he pulled the Lannister man from the ground, squeezing his face as he lifted him, but leaving his eyes so that Gorman could look into them. The man was still defiant, obviously, but Gorman had ways of changing that. Ways that were far better at keeping the man alive compared to slicing his face off. Lannister. Chapter 94, The Ironborn. He pulled the Lannister man from the ground, squeezing his face as he lifted him, but leaving his eyes so that Gorman could look into them. The man was still defiant, obviously, but Gorman had ways of changing that. Ways that were far better at keeping the man alive compared to slicing his face off. You're not a coward, Gorman said in a low voice, his old eyes fixed on the man's gaze. I'll grant you that. So I'll offer you one chance to talk, but only once I tell you what we'll do to you if you don't. Gorman kept his hand over the man's mouth, holding him there as he spoke, his voice low and dark. If you talk, then after the raid is done, we'll set you free, unharmed, and you can stagger back to whatever hovel you call home and weep for being a traitor, or whatever it is you plan to do. You'll have lost your right to call yourself a man, but you'll be alive, unharmed, and unspoiled. Gorman spoke quietly. If you don't talk, then I'll take you back to my ship over there, and we'll peel some splinters off of the walls. Then, we'll start pushing them under your toenails, one at a time, with a hammer, until you talk. Gorman let the statement hang for a moment. If that doesn't work, we'll start on your fingernails. Then we'll start cutting off your toes, then your fingers. He kept his voice low and precise, even as the young man started to look around wildly. After that, we'll probably rip out your teeth, then probably your dick. If you still won't talk at that point, we'll start with the red-hot knives on your skin. And then I'll let my boys get creative. By then it won't be about making you talk anymore, it'll be about making your death as tortuous and protracted as possible. And when you do die eventually, a broken and worthless husk of a man, we'll feed your corpse to pigs so you can get shat out into the mud. Gorman kept his eyes on the man's as he spoke, making sure that the Westerlander knew every word. Of course, if you endure all that, and you still never talk, then you'll have the right to call yourself a true man. But do you think you'll make it that far? Or will you be a broken husk by the halfway mark? Let me tell you, boy, I know how this story ends. Finally, he released the man's cheeks, letting him slump to the ground. Live as a coward or die as a broken corpse. I'll give you a few moments to think about it. Then we'll see if you're ready to talk. Gorman walked back towards where the bulk of his men were grumbling on the coast, clapping Longshanks on the shoulder. Come on, let's have something to eat. We can come back in a bit. The cocky brat, who had given so much lip to Gorman before, seemed a bit awed by the show of force, his eyes wide as he turned and followed without a word, at least for a few dozen paces. That's a lot of effort to take, torturing one man, Longshanks said finally as they moved down towards their ships. If he got past the toenails without talking I'd just kill him. Gorman shrugged. If a man can stomach the thought of all that without breaking, I'd never get anything useful out of him anyway. The Greyjoy heir snorted. You really are as hard as they say. I hadn't seen it before, but I saw it there. Gorman smirked, tapping his forehead with two fingers. A good Ironborn lives as much by his head as his arm. Longshanks, you've got the spirit, but you don't have the experience. He gestured back over his shoulder. If we take that castle you're after it'll be through guile, not strength. We don't have enough men to take even a small keep by storm. Not unless the lion left hardly anything behind. And they'll likely have the men from this town at any rate. Greenlander men are weak, except their knights sometimes, Longshanks grumbled, but didn't disagree. On a ship maybe, but not on top of a wall 15 feet up and throwing rocks at your head. No, we'll see what our friend has to say. If we can't take the castle tomorrow, then we leave in the morning and take our loot back to the islands. There was a long time, perhaps a full 2 minutes when the statement hung in the salty air between them. A silent battle of wills. Of the young and impetuous running against the long teachings of the years. In the end, though, Gorman's side won out. Quote. Fine, I'll leave it to you, Longshanks grumbled, but Gorman met it with a small smile and a nod. Good. The brat could learn when he'd been wrong. That would be a good thing for the Iron Islands when he became Lord of Pike. Lord Quellan was getting on in years anyway. Good, now let's see if our captive's tongue is loosened up yet. Gorman smiled. We may take your plunder yet. Walking back into the square, the man was still chained up, lying on the ground. His eyes were desperate but sharp, a foul expression on his face, as if he'd smelled something disgusting. Gorman just gave him a hearty smile and a jaunty wave. Well then, Greenlander, are you ready to talk? Or should I have the hammer ready? I'll talk. The man said quietly. I have a son at home, and my parents too will miss me, so I'll talk. Smart man, they'll keep a coward company no doubt, Gorman said cheerfully, ignoring as the man grit his teeth. The old raider squatted down next to him. Now tell me, who commands Reddinghall? I know your Lannister lord is off gallivanting about the running country. The man looked at him and frowned, clearly fighting with himself, then sighed. Lord Callum Lannister, the blessed child, commands Reddinghall, though he's fallen direly sick. The man shook his head. A child commands the keep. Longshanks asked beside him. Do Greenlanders do such things? Ha! The man snorted. He's Lord Tywin's son and Lord Tygett's squire. He grinned toothily, despite his situation. What you would do to me, Lord Tywin would do to you if you touched even a hair on Lord Callum's head. Or have you Ironborn not heard the reigns of Castamer? TCH, Longshanks actually frowned beneath his helmet, and Gorman could see why. In vengeance he might be willing to kill the Lord of the Westerland's son, but in practice. No. Taking Lord Tygett's eyes in battle would be one thing, but harming Lord Tywin's son would be another. He wouldn't have any part in it. Say, if Lord Tywin cares about the boy that much. Gorman turned to look at Longshanks, seeing where the younger man's mind was going. How much gold would he part with for ransom? Not enough to be worth going to war with all the 7 kingdoms over. Gorman shook his head. His father is the hand of the king, remember. He'd never find out who did it. Not if we did it right. Longshanks countered. We could ransom him through proxies, take him to Essos. The Greyjoy grinned. Think of the gold, think of the legend. He turned his gaze to the captive. You man. Tell me everything you can about Reddinghall. You agreed to talk, so talk. You Ironborn are savages and fools. The young man said. Lord Tywin will string your guts from the signposts if you lay a finger on his son's head. But I'm already a coward, so fine, the castle has a large stone keep and a curtain wall on 3 sides. Gorman frowned as the man continued to speak. Longshanks, eager as ever, looked thrilled as his foolhardy plan came together. This was something altogether more than Gorman wanted to get involved in. A matter for great lords, not their relatives. He supposed if anyone could get away with it, it would be the Greyjoy heir, but even still it seemed foolhardy. Regardless, Gorman decided that he would take his ships and go home. If Longshanks wanted to risk his life for gold and glory, then let him. And he had such high hopes for the boy just a minute before. Lannister. Chapter 95. A Brush with Danger I. May I inquire after the condition of the blessed child? Septon Bereth asked earnestly, his expression serene, though he was frankly annoying. Qyburn tried not to roll his eyes at the man. He really did. Lord Callum. None of those pretenses of blessings here. The boy had a name. Is recovering in bed. It was foolish of him to personally oversee the evacuation of Redport. Doubly so while he was already ill. Callum had returned with men and supplies, double what they'd need for a short siege, just in case his uncle was waylaid by bad weather or some other poor fortune. He had gotten the men situated, told the others to arm them and teach them to fight on the walls as best they could, stumbled into his room, and collapsed. Qyburn had found him there with a blazing fever, clammy skin, and being worried over by far too many useless clergymen. I wish to pray over him if I may. Septon Bereth pressed, and Qyburn frowned, his eye twitching. It would be better if you let him in, Qyburn. The croaky voice of Lord Callum spoke from inside the room. Qyburn sighed and counted to 10 in his mind. He opened the door for the Septon, who was now projecting an aura of smugness. He just didn't understand. Certainly, Lord Callum had done much to earn the faith's favor with his printing press and his book distribution, but Callum was such an arrogant child, Qyburn simply couldn't imagine giving prattling Septons the time of day. They weren't even good for fighting to defend the castle. "Milord," Septon Berith said as he approached the sickly child, hidden beneath the covers of his bed with a damp rag on his forehead to bleed the heat. "Are you feeling any better?" "Obviously not, fool," Qyburn thought bitterly. If Callum hadn't gone personally to save their little town, he might well be on his feet today. "A little, Septon. 7 willing I will be better by the time my uncle returns." The boy's voice was just above a whisper. "That is good, milord. If you don't mind, I will pray for you." "I would like that." Callum gave the pompous clergyman a small smile. Qyburn could only shake his head by the door. This was all a waste of time. It seemed every other minute there was some distraction or other to bother his master, who ought to be resting at all hours until his body recovered properly. "Merciful 7 who are one, pour out once more your blessings on this holy child, who has carried forth your word to all the masses. Mother, bring him healing and comfort. Father, raise him on your shoulder. Crone, guide him to a bright future. Warrior, return his bodily strength to him. Maid, tend to him at your bosom. Smith, bless the maester who tends him. Stranger, turn him away from the door of death." The Septon seemed to finish speaking for a moment, making the sign of the 7-pointed star over his chest. Qyburn could only snort quietly to himself. As if he had ever needed the smith's blessing to heal the sick and wounded. Unfortunately, the seeming end of the prayer was only temporary. The Septon promptly lit a stick of incense and continued his words. "Thus, by the power of all the 7 who are one, I pray that this blessed child may be healed. Chosen of the smith and warrior, maiden and crone, a blessing to all men and women of Westeros, let the 7 not forsake you in your hour of need, but place their tender arms upon you and heal your every injury." He paused just a moment. "In the name of the 7, be healed." He held his hands out over Callum as if that would miraculously cure the cold he had exacerbated with his heroics. "Thank you, Septon," Callum replied quietly. "I do hope that the 7 take care of me, but before you go, I have something else to ask of you." "Oh?" Septon Berith asked. "Simply tell me, blessed child, and I shall see it done if it is within my power." Callum nodded, shivering slightly despite the pile of blankets atop him. "Could you tell the men something for me?" Callum smiled slightly. "Could you tell them, now is the time to do as the warrior does. That if the Ironborn come, he will guide and help them, to protect their family, their friends, and the very Westerlands themselves." Callum asked. "Can you tell them, Septon, share the word, and raise their spirits?" Septon Berith looked ecstatic if anything, rising to his feet with a brilliant smile on his face. Of course, I will. I could do no less." He seemed to almost be in adulation. A state Qyburn could only attribute to the reverence young Callum held in their hearts. He soon enough rushed out, leaving only Qyburn and Callum behind, along with the incense stick he had left burning beside the boy's bed. "Would you mind putting that out, Qyburn?" The boy yawned. "My thoughts are hazy enough as it is." Qyburn snorted but walked over and put the incense out anyway. "I have no idea why you make time for superstitious fools. Not like I'm using my time for much anyway. If he can raise the spirits of the men, even a little, it'll make it easier to protect the castle from the Ironborn." Callum coughed a bit. "I agree with you for the record. I should have sent someone else to lead the evacuation. Vindicating as that is to hear, next time make that decision before you make yourself sicker," Qyburn grumbled as he came over, pressing his hand on Callum's forehead once again to check his temperature. "It's gone down a little. You shouldn't be in any severe danger at this point." "Other than from the Ironborn," Callum mumbled. "Yes, other than from the Ironborn. I was told that one of the scouts didn't return today." Qyburn said quietly. "Herwin, I believe his name was." "The Ironborn likely have him then," Callum said quietly. "Tell the men to set a double watch tonight. Actually tell them to have a double watch at all hours at least until my uncle gets here." "Yes, milord." Qyburn nodded. "Before I go inform them, are you hungry? I can have some beef soup brought up." "I'm fine for the moment." "Just go relay my orders please, Qyburn." "Of course, milord." Qyburn smiled slightly and nodded, leaving the room and sighing. This really would be better left to military men, but he supposed he was the next best thing Callum had to a second in command, so relay his orders he must. The night wind was cool and dry, a pleasant change from the recent soggy weather. It was well above freezing and Qyburn could walk around comfortably in his typical black robe. Finding his way over to the gatehouse by torchlight, he found some of Lord Tygett's men. The ones who had real training, not the barebones militia they'd dragged out of Redport. "Ah, Black Maester, what's brought you out here tonight?" One of the men, Qyburn didn't recall his actual name, greeted him cheerfully, looking up from a dice game of some kind. "Relaying Lord Callum's orders," Qyburn said dryly. He requested that the castle maintain a double watch at all hours until his lord uncle arrives to relieve us. Already done, the man replied cheerfully. I'm glad Lord Callum thought of it, but we've so many men from Redport, we can keep the walls near full at all hours and still give plenty of time for rest. He smiled. We've gone from a garrison of 40 to 300. It shan't be hard to keep the watch up. Qyburn nodded. That made sense. He had no idea how many men had come from Redport, but they had certainly filled the castle substantially. That being as it may, please ensure the men are well on guard. He believes that the scout who failed to return today is most likely in Ironborn hands. The cavalryman nodded grimly. I'll be sure to do that, but I doubt there are enough Ironborn in that whole fleet to take this place. Not defended the way it is now. Nonetheless, be careful, Qyburn said, raising his hand and waving slightly. I don't want to be butchered by Ironborn and neither should Y. Alarm, alarm. Qyburn stilled as a shout came from atop the main keep. A man standing at the edge of it shouted down at the crowd. Intruders in the castle. Intruders. There's a rope on the wall, and Jaren was killed. Qyburn felt his lip stiffen, but the man he'd been talking to, the cavalryman, was already moving, racing past him to rush to the sword stand across the room, already bellowing orders to the militia. To arms, men. To arms. Hold the gatehouse. Man the walls. Where there's one Ironborn there's 20. Equals 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 equals. If you'd like to support my work, or get early access to chapters before public release, you can join my Patreon. Link to join my Patreon. Patreon. Com. Moonlight 10. To be continued.